Daniel Carter slammed his fork down so hard the couple at the next table flinched. Because the woman standing beside him, the obese woman in the torn coat who had just whispered, "Can I eat your leftovers?" was the same woman who had destroyed his life 7 years ago. Same eyes, same jaw, same Sophia Bennett who sat at the head of a conference table in a tailored blazer, told him without blinking, "Your position has been eliminated." Effective today, 54 days before his retirement vested. She had taken everything, and now she was standing in a diner, asking to eat his scraps. Daniel's hand was shaking, not from anger, from the one question he never saw coming. What kind of man am I going to be right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this hit you, subscribe. Because what Daniel does next will change both of their lives forever. The Millfield Diner sat on the corner of Route 9 and Camden Street, the way old things sit quietly, without apology, like it had always been there, and always would be. It wasn't fancy. The booths had duct tape on 2 of the cushions. The menu hadn't changed since 2009. The coffee was either perfect or terrible, depending on which waitress was working. And tonight it was Patrice, which meant it was perfect. Daniel Carter came here every Thursday. Not because the food was exceptional. Not because the ambiance was anything worth talking about. He came because Thursday was the one night his daughter Lily had piano practice across the street, and he had exactly 53 minutes to sit alone, eat something warm, and pretend just for a moment that he was a man without problems. He was 51 years old. He had the hands of someone who worked with them, thick-knuckled and calloused, the kind of hands that told you more about a man than his resume ever could. His hair was going gray at the temples. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow from a job site accident 3 years ago. And he had eyes, Lily always said this, that looked like they were always doing math. Always calculating. Always bracing. He had been bracing for a long time. He'd ordered the cheddar bacon burger, a side of onion rings he hadn't touched, and a coffee that Patrice had already refilled twice, without him asking. He was reading something on his phone, an email from Lily's school, about a field trip that cost $45. He was going to have to figure out when the chair beside him scraped. He didn't look up. He assumed it was Patrice, or maybe Carl, the old veteran, who sat at the counter every Thursday, and sometimes wandered over to complain about the government. But nobody sat down. Instead, someone stood next to his table. Still. The kind of still that makes you feel it before you see it. Daniel looked up. The woman standing beside his table was heavyset, wearing a dark green coat that was at least 2 sizes too large, and had a tear along the left collar that someone had tried to repair with iron-on tape. Her hair was pulled back hard against her head. She was looking at his plate, not at him. And her jaw, her whole face, actually was doing the thing faces do when a person is working very hard to hold themselves together. She was maybe 50. Could have been more. Hard to say. The kind of face that had been through enough that age stopped being the most obvious thing about it. And then she spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, barely above a whisper. "I can see you haven't finished. But if you're not going to want the rest of that..." She stopped. Swallowed. "Can I eat your leftovers?" The diner didn't actually go silent. Patrice was still clanging cups behind the counter. The TV in the corner was still showing the weather. 2 guys in the far booth were still arguing about a football score. But inside Daniel's head, everything went absolutely quiet. Because he knew her. It took him 4 full seconds. He would count them later, alone in his truck, replaying the moment over and over. 4 full seconds for his brain to close the gap between the woman standing in front of him and the woman from his memory. But when it closed completely. Sophia Bennett. The name hit him like a fist to the sternum. 7 years ago, Daniel Carter had sat in a different kind of chair. Not a diner booth. A plastic chair in a hallway outside a conference room on the 14th floor of the Meridian Group's headquarters in downtown Hartford. He'd been wearing the only suit he owned. Navy blue, bought for his sister's wedding. Slightly too tight in the shoulders. He'd had a folder on his lap containing 8 years of performance reviews, all of them strong. All of them glowing. He'd been told it was a workforce restructuring meeting. He hadn't been told it was the last day he would ever walk into that building as an employee. The woman who had delivered the news wasn't the HR director. The HR director was there. Yes, a thin man named Gerald who couldn't make eye contact, but the woman who sat at the head of the table, the woman who had actually signed the paperwork, the woman who had looked at Daniel with eyes as flat and distant as winter sky and said, "We appreciate your service to this company, but your position has been eliminated effective today." That woman was Sophia Bennett, Chief Executive Officer. Sophia Bennett, who had built the Meridian Group from a mid-sized consulting firm into a regional powerhouse with 400 employees and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. Sophia Bennett, who appeared in Hartford Business Journal twice a year. Sophia Bennett, who once gave a TED Talk about people-first leadership that had 2 million views online. Sophia Bennett, who had fired 37 people on a Tuesday in March without looking a single one of them in the eye. Daniel had walked out of that building with a box of desk belongings, a letter about his Cobra insurance options, and a severance check that lasted him 4 months. He'd been 54 days away from fully vesting his retirement benefits when they cut him. 54 days. He had spent the better part of 6 months after that in a darkness he didn't talk about. Not with Lily, not with his sister Karen, not with anyone. He'd found contract work, eventually construction management. Back to the trades he'd started in before he'd spent 8 years climbing the corporate ladder, and he'd rebuilt slowly, painfully. The way a man rebuilds when he has a daughter watching him and can't afford to fall apart completely. He still had the box. It was in his garage. He hadn't been able to throw it away. And now Sophia Bennett was standing next to his table at the Millfield Diner, asking if she could eat his leftovers. "Sir," her voice again. Softer this time, if that was possible. There was something's in it, not weakness exactly, but the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from having something difficult many times and knowing you have to keep doing it. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have. I'll leave you alone." She started to turn, and something happened in Daniel Carter that he could not fully explain, even later. He didn't feel triumph. He'd imagined this, not this exact scenario, but something like it, something where the universe righted itself, and the people who had hurt him finally understood what hurt felt like. He'd imagined it enough times in the dark, months after the layoff, that he was a little ashamed of how detailed those imaginings had been. But standing here, actually in it, he didn't feel triumph. He felt something that made him angrier at himself than at her. He felt pity. "Wait," he said. She stopped. Daniel looked at his plate. The burger was about 2/3 eaten. There were still 6 onion rings he hadn't touched. He'd been planning to take the burger home for Lily, wrap it in foil, tell her it was a Thursday surprise, the way he used to do when she was little. He looked at the woman at Sophia, and he made himself actually look. Not at the memory of her. Not at the woman from the 14th floor in her tailored blazer and her conference room authority. At the woman standing in front of him right now, in a coat that didn't fit, with shoes that were starting to separate at one of the soles. "Sit down," he said. She blinked. I said, "Sit down." He pulled out the chair across from him. "Not the leftovers." "Sit down, and I'll get you something proper." "You don't have to." "I know I don't." He met her eyes for the first time. "Sit down anyway." Patrice appeared with her coffee pot and a raised eyebrow that was doing a lot of work. "Can she get a menu?" Daniel said. Patrice put a menu on the table without comment, which was exactly why Daniel liked Patrice. Sophia sat down slowly, like she wasn't sure the chair would hold her. She kept her coat on. She held the menu with both hands and stared at it the way people stare at it. Wait, they're not actually reading them, when they're just trying to buy themselves a moment. Daniel drank his coffee. He didn't say anything. He wasn't ready to say anything. He was running through things. He was running through 7 years of things. "The burger's good," he finally said. "If you want to know." She looked up. "That's what I'd order," he said. "But the soup is good if you're cold." Something shifted in her face. "How do you know I'm cold?" "You've had that coat on since you walked in." "Diner's warm." "Coat's still on." She looked down at the menu again. "The soup," she said quietly. "Patrice." Patrice materialized. "Bowl of the tomato bisque," Daniel said. "And whatever bread you've got." And he looked at Sophia. "Coffee?" She nodded once, eyes still on the table. Coffee too. Patrice wrote it down and left. No comment. No performance. God bless her. The silence between the two of them was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight, that has a shape, that both people can feel pressing on them. Sophia broke it first. You didn't have to do this. You said that already. I mean it. So did I. Daniel set down his cup. I don't do things I don't mean to do. She looked at him then. Really looked. And he watched the moment when she started to see something, some flicker of recognition beginning to work through her, the way recognition does, slowly, then all at once. Do I know you? She said. Daniel held her gaze. What do you think? She stared. He watched her search. He watched her file through faces and names and years. And he watched the exact moment she found him. Her face didn't collapse. He gave her credit for that. It went very still instead. The way water goes still right before it freezes. Oh, she said. Yeah. You're Daniel Carter. He said it himself. Steady. Meridian Group. March of 2018. 14 months before I would have had my retirement fully vested. She put the menu down. Daniel, she said. And the way she said his name, not as a greeting, not as an exclamation, but as something heavy she was setting down carefully, it told him she had not forgotten him either. I haven't thought about don't, he said. She stopped. Don't tell me you haven't thought about it, he said. Or that you didn't know. Or that it wasn't personal. I've spent 7 years not saying what I wanted to say to you. I don't need to hear the things people say when they're not ready to be honest yet. Patrice brought the soup. She set it down in front of Sophia gently, like she understood something was happening at this table that she wasn't part of. She refilled Daniel's coffee and disappeared. Sophia looked at the soup. She didn't reach for it. Go ahead, Daniel said. Eat. This conversation isn't going anywhere. She picked up the spoon. Her hands were steady. He noted that. Whatever she was feeling, her hands were steady. She ate. And Daniel watched her, not because he was trying to make her uncomfortable, though he understood if it did, but because he was trying to reconcile the two images. The one from the conference room. The one sitting across from him now. He'd replayed that day 10,000 times. He'd rehearsed what he would say to Sophia Bennett if he ever saw her again. He'd had whole conversations with her, in the shower, in the truck, lying awake at 2 in the morning. Long, eloquent, devastating conversations where he said exactly the right things, and she understood exactly what she had done. None of those conversations started with, "Can I get you some soup?" "Why here?" he asked. She looked up. "Why this diner?" She set the spoon down. "I walk past it at night sometimes, when I can't sleep." She glanced around the room, not with longing exactly, but with the specific attention of someone who has learned to catalog warmth. It's lit up. It looks warm. Where are you staying? A pause. I have a room, she said it carefully. The way people say things that are technically true but not the whole truth. On Delwood. It's fine. Daniel knew Delwood. He'd done a project on that block 4 years ago. The houses there were mostly cut up into weekly rentals that went to people between things. Between jobs. Between lives. How long have you been in Millfield? He asked. About 8 months. And before that? She lifted the cup of coffee and held it in both hands, not to drink, just to hold. Providence. Before that, Boston. Before that, Hartford. The trail of her unraveling. Hartford was where it had started for both of them, in different ways. What happened? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. You mean after? After you dismantled 37 people's livelihoods and then ran your company into the ground? Yes. He said it without heat. That surprised him. After that. She didn't flinch from the words. Another thing he noted. The board removed me 14 months after the restructuring, she said. There was a series of bad acquisitions decisions I didn't fully understand the implications of. At decisions I should have pushed back on harder. I was CEO in title, but the board had consolidated a lot of real authority. When things went wrong, I was the face that took the fall. She paused. Which was fair. I was the face. And the money? Gone. Most of it was tied up in company equity. The lawsuits took the rest. Lawsuits from whom? Some of the people we laid off. A class action. She looked at him directly. You weren't part of it. No, Daniel said, I wasn't. Why not? He thought about it. He'd been approached. His attorney had laid it out clearly. The case was viable. He was a strong candidate to be a named plaintiff. The potential settlement wasn't nothing. Because I needed to move forward, he said finally. Not backward. He paused. And because every minute I spent in that case was a minute I wasn't spending on my daughter. Sophia nodded slowly. How old is she? She asked. He hesitated. This was personal ground. This was ground he hadn't planned to share with this woman, with any version of this woman he'd imagined encountering. 14, he said. Something moved across Sophia's face. Her name's Lily, he said, not knowing why he kept going. She plays piano. She's better at it than I deserve to have a daughter be. Sophia looked down. Her voice when it came was quieter. I don't have children, I know. She glanced up. How? You were in the news enough. I paid attention. He didn't say I obsessed. I read every article. I followed every development. But that was also true. I know you were married once. That it ended before the company did. She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. He left when things started falling apart. Before the board removed me, he could see it coming before I could. Or maybe he saw other things coming that I still can't quite name. She said it without self-pity. That, too, he noted. The diner was thinning out. 2 of the tables cleared. Patrice was rolling silverware at the counter, doing that methodical thing servers do at the end of a shift. The TV had moved from weather to sports. Daniel checked his phone. 21 minutes before he needed to be across the street for Lily. I want to ask you something, he said. Okay. And I want a real answer. Not a board meeting answer. Not a press release. She held his gaze. Okay, did you know? He asked. When you signed those papers. When you were in that room saying, position eliminated. Effective today, did you know what it was going to do to the people on the other side of the table? Sophia was quiet for a long moment. I told myself I did, she said. That's not an answer. No, she said, I didn't. She exhaled slowly. I knew they were people. I knew they had lives. I told myself I understood that. But understanding something in the abstract and understanding it in front of you, sitting across from it at a diner table, those are different things. She paused. I was looking at metrics, at projections, at what the board said we needed to cut to stabilize the next quarter. I was not looking at Daniel Carter. I was looking at a salary figure attached to a position title. The honesty of it landed harder than he'd expected. He'd wanted denial, or justification, something he could push back against. This was harder to hold. That's a terrible thing, he said. Yes, she said, it is. I was 54 days from vesting. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. You knew then? I know now. I went back through the records. She opened her eyes. After the lawsuits. After everything. I went back through every file from that restructuring. All 37. I know the number of days for most of you. Something tightened in Daniel's chest. Why, he said. Because I needed to know what I did. Her voice didn't break, but it bent. Not the company. Me, what I did. His phone buzzed. Piano practice. He stood up and dug his wallet out. He put $40 on the table. Enough for the soup, the coffee, and a cushion. Sophia looked at the money and then up at him. I don't have, she started. I didn't put it there so you could pay me back, he said. He put on his jacket. Get another bowl if you want. Or take the change. He zipped up. He looked at her one more time, this woman who had been a kind of monster in his mind for 7 years, who was sitting in a too-big corner booth with the half-eaten bowl of soup and a cup of coffee going cold. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. It came out more honestly than he intended. I don't know what this is. Sophia looked up at him. You fed someone who was hungry, she said quietly. That's what this is. He stood there for a moment. Will you be back here, he said. Thursday. Same time. She looked at him. Carefully. She was trying to assess whether the question was a kindness or something else. I walk past most nights, she said. Thursday, he said again. I'm here every Thursday. 53 minutes, while my daughter has piano. He didn't say come back. He didn't say I want to talk to you again. He didn't say the things that would have explained what was happening in him, because he didn't understand those things himself. He turned and walked to the door. He pushed it open, and the cold came at him like it always does in New England in November, fast and without apology. He walked across the street toward the piano studio, where Lily would come out in 4 minutes, with her backpack and her sheet music and her 14-year-old complaints about the difficulty of Chopin, and he would listen to every word, and it would be the best part of his week. He did not look back at the diner. He told himself he wouldn't think about it. He was still telling himself that when Lily walked out the door and said, "Dad, you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." And Daniel Carter looked at his daughter, at her dark eyes that missed nothing, at the way she tilted her head exactly the way her mother used to, and he said, "I'm fine, Bug. How was Chopin?" And she rolled her eyes and started talking, and he listened. But in the back of his mind, quiet and persistent as a stone in a shoe, I went back through every file from that restructuring. All 37. I know the number of days for most of you. He drove home. He made Lily's lunch for the next day. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she went to sleep, and he did not know, could not have said whether what he felt was the beginning of something healing or the beginning of something entirely new unraveling. He only knew that the Thursday after next felt, for the first time in a long time, like something worth counting toward, and he wasn't sure yet whether that was a good thing. He made it exactly 11 steps from the diner door before his legs stopped working. Not literally. He didn't collapse on the sidewalk. But something in his body, something below the level of decision, below the level of thought, just quit. He stood there on the cold concrete outside the Millfield diner, with the wind cutting through his jacket and his hands hanging at his sides, and he could not make himself take the next step. Lily was going to walk out of that piano studio in 3 minutes. He had 3 minutes. He turned around. He pushed back through the diner door, and Sophia looked up from the table with the expression of a woman who had already accepted that she was alone, and had been startled out of that acceptance. And Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat back down. "I lied," he said. She stared at him. "I said I don't know what this is." He put his elbows on the table. "But I do know. I've been thinking about you for 7 years. Not good thoughts. And I walked out of here 30 seconds ago, telling myself I was done, that I'd done enough, that I bought you some soup, and that's sufficient. That's more than you deserve." He stopped. "But I don't want to be the man who walks away from a question just because the answer is uncomfortable." Sophia hadn't moved. She was watching him, the way people watch things they don't fully trust yet. "What's the question?" she said. "How did you get here?" He said it plainly. Not cruelly. Not Millfield. Not this diner. How did Sophia Bennett, woman who ran a 400-person company, who was in the Business Journal twice a year, who gave a TED Talk about people first leadership, how did she get to standing in a diner asking a stranger for his leftover burger? The question sat between them like something solid. Sophia picked up her coffee cup, put it down without drinking. She looked at the table for a long moment, and Daniel could see her deciding. He could see the exact internal negotiation, the part of her that said, "Don't. You don't owe him this. You don't owe anyone this," and the part that said something else, something quieter and more tired. The tired part. 1. "The board removed me in May of 2019, she said. "I knew it was coming. I'd known for about 3 months. When it happened, it was almost a relief. That part's hard to explain to people, but when you've been dreading something long enough, the actual event is almost peaceful." She paused. "The 6 months after were not peaceful." "What happened?" "My attorney told me I had grounds to push back, that the board had overstepped in certain procedural ways, that there was a wrongful termination case to be made." She almost smiled, not with humor, but with the retrospective recognition of a person looking back at a mistake they can now see clearly. "I pushed back. I spent 14 months and most of my liquid assets on a legal fight that I eventually lost." She set the spoon down. "By the time it was over, the house was mortgaged to fund the litigation. My ex-husband had been gone for 6 months by then. The company's equity was worthless. The class action settlement from the restructuring took what was left." "How much was left?" Daniel asked. She met his eyes. "Enough to move twice and then not enough." He absorbed that. He thought about the settlement. He thought about 37 people who had been in that room on that Tuesday in March. who had each walked out with their boxes, who had each done their own version of the dark months he'd done. The lawyers got most of it, she said. The settlement amounts were smaller than anyone wanted. The attorney's fees were not. Were you part of the decision to settle? I had no standing by then. I was a named defendant, not a party with authority. The board settled. I had no choice. She paused. Not that I would have fought it. It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing that was right in the whole ugly sequence. Daniel looked at her. You believe that? Or is that what you say now because it sounds better? She didn't get defensive. She thought about it, genuinely thought about it. He could see the consideratiousness working through her face. Both, she said finally. When I first said it, it was what sounded better. It took me about another year before it became what I actually believed. People don't usually tell you that part, that sometimes you perform the correct belief before you actually feel it. That the performance, if you do it long enough, eventually becomes real. She paused. Or maybe I'm still performing. I don't know. I'm not always sure I have good judgment about myself. That honesty sat strange in Daniel's chest. He had built Sophia Bennett into something in his mind. Something monolithic and certain. A person without doubt. A person who had made a calculation and executed it cleanly and moved on without looking back. That architecture had served him, had given his anger somewhere to live. The woman across from him was doing something to that architecture. He was not sure yet whether he wanted it done. His phone buzzed. Lily. He looked at the screen. She'd texted. Done early, Mrs. Kowalski let us out. Where are you? He typed back across the street. 1 min. He stood. I have to get my daughter. Sophia nodded. She didn't say anything. Thursday, he said again. Like last time. This time she said okay. He walked out. He crossed the street. Lily was standing outside the piano studio with her backpack over one shoulder, sheet music tucked under her arm, breath clouding in the cold air. And when she saw him, she said, Dad, who were you texting? You looked weird. Client stuff, he said. Come on. She fell into beside him. She talked about the lesson, about how Mrs. Kowalski had finally told her she was ready to try the nocturne, the hard one, the one she'd been working toward for 4 months, and Daniel listened and nodded and said the right things. But in the back of his mind, steady and insistent, sometimes you perform the correct belief before you actually feel it. He didn't sleep much that night. The next Thursday came the way Thursdays do, when you've been waiting for them faster than any other day that week, and slower than you wanted once it arrived. Daniel sat in the same booth. He ordered the same burger. He told himself. He wasn't watching the door. He was watching the door. She came in at 7:42, 12 minutes into his 53. She was wearing the same coat. She saw him, and she stopped for just a moment in the doorway, a half-second hesitation, the kind that asks, is this still okay? And he lifted his chin in a short nod, and she walked over. Patrice appeared before Sophia even sat down. She looked at Sophia, then at Daniel, then at Sophia again. And then she put a menu on the table and said, coffee, which in Patrice language meant, I see you. You're fine. Here's what you need. Please, Sophia said. Patrice poured and left. You came back, Daniel said. You asked me to. A lot of people ask for things they don't actually want. She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. I know, but I thought about what you said about not walking away from questions, because the answers are uncomfortable. She paused. I've been doing that for a long time. Walking away. I'm tired of it. They ordered. Sophia got the burger this time. Daniel watched her decide on it. Watched the small deliberation, the menu open, the scan, the choice, and he understood. That, even the act of ordering in a restaurant was something was rebuilding her relationship with. The whole ordinary human act of sitting down and ordering food was not ordinary for her anymore. Can I ask you something? He said while they waited. You're going to anyway, she said. Not unkindly. Fair. He turned his coffee cup. The TED Talk. People First Leadership. Were you performing that too? Or did you actually believe it? She was quiet long enough that he thought she was going to tell him that was too far, that there were limits, that whatever this strange truce between them was, it didn't extend to dissecting her public record. But she said, I believed every word of it. and then fired 37 people 14 months later, and then fired 37 people 14 months later. She exhaled. That's the part that's hardest to reconcile. Not for you, for me. I don't say that to make it about me. I say it because it would be easier, in a way, if I had been a hypocrite. If the talk was cynical and the firing was just me, doing what I'd always planned to do. But I believed it, and I still did it. Which means the problem wasn't that I didn't have values. It was that I didn't have the courage to defend them when the pressure came. The food arrived. They ate. The silence between them was different from last week. Still waited. But waited differently, less like standoff, and more like two people carrying something, and having silently agreed to carry it in the same direction for a while. "Tell me about your daughter," Sophia said. Daniel looked up. "You don't have to," she said. "But you mentioned her last week, and the way you said her name." She stopped. "What about it? It changed your whole face." She said it simply like a fact. Daniel put his fork down. He thought about boundaries. About what this woman had access to and what she didn't. About whether talking about Lily with Sophia Bennett was something he could justify. And then he thought, she's not the monster from the conference room right now. She's a woman eating a burger in a diner who just told you the truth about herself in a way that cost her something. "She's 14, he said. "I told you that. Her name is Lily. She's the smartest person I know, including every person I've worked with professionally." A pause. "She was 7 when her mother left. Just left. Not an ugly divorce. Not a fight. Julia just realized one day that she didn't want the life she had and she walked away from it." He stopped. "Walked away from both of us." Sophia said nothing. She understood that some things you just receive. "I had Lily full-time from that point," he said. "And then the Meridian layoff happened. And I had a 7-year-old and no job and a mortgage I couldn't make." He picked up his fork. "We lost the house in 2019. Rented a place on Marsh Street for 2 years. I was doing day labor while I rebuilt my contractor's license. Lily thought we were simplifying, which is a thing she said to her teacher when her teacher asked about the move. She was 9 years old. She told her teacher we were simplifying." Something moved across Sophia's face that she didn't try to hide. "She sounds remarkable," she said. "She is." He was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't know that I know who you are. She doesn't know any of the company history. I never put that weight on her." "That was generous," Sophia said. "Of you. It wasn't generosity, it was survival. If I'd talked about it, I'd have had to keep living in it." He met her eyes. "I moved forward. It's not the same as healed, but it's what I had." Sophia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not guilt she'd done guilt. He could tell. She'd done guilt extensively. Something more like recognition. Like seeing herself in a mirror she hadn't expected to find. "When I was in Boston," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "about 2 years ago, I hit the bottom of what I could manage alone. I won't describe what that looked like in detail, but I'll tell you that I understood for the first time what it's like to not be able to get up. Literally, to have nothing pulling you out of bed because nothing is waiting for you." Daniel listened. "I didn't have a Lily," she said. "I had nothing I was responsible to. And I think that's what saved you. In the end. Not strength. Not character. Just having someone who needed you to keep going." The truth of that moved through Daniel quietly. He had thought for years that he'd survived the dark months through discipline, through will, through some core of stubbornness that simply refused to fail his daughter. Now someone who had no one was sitting across from him and describing with perfect clarity what it was that had actually saved him. "What pulled you out?" he asked. "In Boston." She thought about it. "A woman named Cora," she said. "She ran a community meal program out of a church basement in Dorchester. She found me or I found her. I don't remember exactly. She fed me. Literally. And then she gave me something to do. She said, 'You look like someone who used to organize things. Go organize my supply closet.'" A ghost of a real smile. "I spent 3 days organizing that supply closet. And at the end of 3 days I'd eaten 6 meals and slept somewhere warm, and I'd talked to maybe 30 people and helped stack canned goods in alphabetical order, and I felt for the first time in maybe 2 years like a person." Daniel was quiet. She didn't know who I was, Sophia said. Or if she did, she didn't say. She just saw someone who needed to be useful. The almost smile again, sadder this time. Turns out that's the thing. Not being helped, being useful. That's what brings you back. Is that why you're helping people here? He said. In Millfield? She looked at him sharply. What do you mean? 2 Tuesdays ago. On Cedar. With the Reyes family. You were carrying grocery bags. She stared at him for a long moment. You were watching me? I live 3 blocks from there. I was walking home. You didn't see me. The sharpness faded. The Reyes family has 4 kids. Maria works nights, and her husband is on disability. They needed groceries. Where do you get the money? He asked. For groceries you bring to other people when you can't always afford your own. I work, she said. Simply. I clean offices, 4 mornings a week. I get paid in cash a beat. I don't need much for myself. So what's left goes somewhere. Daniel put both hands flat on the table and looked at this woman. At the coat she couldn't afford to replace. At the shoes with the separating sole. At the face of a woman who was cleaning offices 4 mornings a week and spending what was left on other people's groceries. Why? He said. It came out rough. Why are you doing this? You don't owe this town anything. You don't owe those people anything. No, she said. I don't. She looked straight at him. But I owe 37 people something. And I can't find all 37 of them. So I do what I can, where I am, with whoever's in front of me. She paused. It's not penance. I don't believe in penance. It's just the only way I know how to be a person now. The other way didn't work. The diner was quiet around them. Patrice had gone to the back. The TV was low. Daniel's jaw was tight. Not with anger, he was trying to figure out what it was with. Something that didn't have a good name. Something that lived right at the border between the story he'd told himself for 7 years and a different story that was forcing its way in. I need to ask you something, and I need you to not qualify it, he said. Okay. Do you understand specifically, concretely, what happened to my family? Not 37 people. My family. My daughter. What those 54 days cost us. Sophia held his gaze without flinching. Tell me, she said. I want to hear it from you. Daniel had not talked about this. Not out loud. Not in the specific factual. This what happened way she was asking him to. He'd lived it. He'd filed it. He'd put it in the garage with the box. But she was asking. And she was not looking away. The retirement money would have been $64,000, he said. Fully vested. When they cut me, I got a prorated fraction about $9,000. He kept his voice even. He'd learned to keep his voice even. With 64, I could have bridged the gap. I could have kept the mortgage current while I looked for work. I could have kept Lily in her school, with her friends, in the only house she remembered living in. He stopped. Instead, I scrambled. I borrowed from my sister, who couldn't afford to lend it. I worked a roofing job with a crew that didn't speak the same language as me in January in Connecticut. I sold my wife's jewelry, the stuff Julia left behind. He stopped again. Lily found out about the jewelry 2 years later. She never said anything about it. But she knows. She knows what I sold and why. Sophia's eyes were wet. She was not trying to hide it. The house went anyway, he said. We moved in March. Lily had to finish 2nd grade in a new school. She was 7. He took a breath. A kid's whole world at 7 is their room and their school and their friends. We took all 3 at once. Daniel, Sophia said. I don't say this, so you'll feel worse than you already do, he said. I say it because you asked me to tell you, and nobody has ever asked me to tell them, and I have been carrying the specifics of this story in my chest for 7 years, and I'm going to finish it. She closed her mouth. She nodded once. Lily is okay, he said. She's better than okay. She's the nocturne in the piano studio across the street, and she's the reason I get up, and she is the single best thing that has ever happened in my life. His voice went rough for just a moment. But there are things she lost that she doesn't even know she lost, because she was too young to know she had them. And that's the part that gets me at 2 in the morning. Not what she knew she lost. What she lost before she was old enough to know what it was. The silence after was complete. Sophia did not try to fill it. Did not apologize he'd told her not to. Not because he didn't want her to feel the weight of it, but because he'd heard enough apologies that were really about the person giving them, about making themselves feel better, about releasing pressure. She sat with it. She let it sit. And that more than any word she'd said was what made him believe her. Finally, she said, "What would make it right? If you could say." "Nothing makes it right," he said. "That's not how it works." "I know. But if..." "I'm not looking for payment," he said. "I never was. That's not what I needed from you." "What did you need?" He thought about it. He had the strange experience of discovering the answer as he said it. "Not before." "I needed you to be real," he said. "I needed you to be an actual person who made an actual mistake and had to live with it. Not a symbol. Not a face on a decision I couldn't do anything about." He stopped. "That's what I couldn't stand, that I could be knocked sideways by something so big, and the person who did it was so far away. So untouchable." He looked at her. "You're not certain?" "No," she said. "I haven't been certain in years." "That helps," he said. "I don't know if it should, but it does." Patrice materialized with the coffee pot. She refilled both cups with the practiced invisibility of someone who knew exactly when to appear and when not to say anything. They sat there for another 20 minutes. They talked less. The big things had been said, and what was left was smaller, but somehow more real. Sophia told him about the supply closet in Dorchester and the woman named Cora who had alphabetized canned goods and given someone back their usefulness. Daniel told her about the January roofing job, about the way his hands had blistered and then toughened, and about the particular quality of satisfaction in physical work when your mind wouldn't give you any peace. They talked about the kind of things people talk about when there's always a surprise to cover. Another person understands what they mean. At 8:23 he had to leave. He stood and reached for his wallet, and Sophia said, "I have it this time." He looked at her. "I have it," she said again. "Please." He thought about arguing. He thought about the torn coat and the separating sole and the cash from the office cleaning work. He left his wallet in his pocket. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said back. He walked out into the cold. He picked up Lily from the studio, and she was talking about the nocturne before he'd even finished the hello hug, talking about the left-hand part that kept losing her. And Daniel said, "You'll get it." And she said, "You always say that." And he said, "Because you always do." And she smiled the way she smiled when she was trying not to, and they walked to the truck. That night after Lily was in bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He thought about 37 names he didn't know. He thought about a woman in a church basement in Dorchester alphabetizing canned goods. He thought about what it costs to go back through every file and learn how many days each person had left. He thought about the specific number 54 and the fact that she'd known it, that she'd gone looking for it. He got up and went to the garage. He found the box. He didn't open it. He just stood there with his hand on the top of it, in the cold, with the fluorescent light buzzing overhead, and he stood there for maybe 5 minutes before he went back inside. But he moved the box from the back of the shelf to the front. He didn't know exactly why. He only knew it felt like the beginning of being willing to look at it. And that was more than he'd been willing to do in 7 years. 3 weeks into their Thursday dinners, Daniel made a mistake. He mentioned Sophia to his sister. Not the full story. Not her name. Just a woman he'd been talking to at the diner. Someone with a complicated past. Someone who'd been through some things. Karen had listened on the phone with the particular quality of silence that older sisters deploy when they're gathering information. And then she'd said, "Is she pretty?" And Daniel had said, "That's not what this is." And Karen had said, "I didn't ask what it is. I asked if she's pretty." And Daniel had hung up. He regretted mentioning it. But the truth was he'd needed to tell someone, because the Thursday dinners were becoming something he couldn't carry entirely alone. They were becoming the thing he measured the week by. He'd catch himself on a Wednesday job site, running numbers on a bathroom renovation, and he'd think, "Tomorrow." And that one word had more weight in it than he knew how to account for. The fourth Thursday was when things shifted. Sophia was already in the booth when he arrived. That was new. She'd always come in after him, always that 12-minute gap. But she was sitting there with a coffee already going. and something in her posture that was different from the previous week's tighter, held differently, like she'd been waiting, not just for him, but for the courage to say something specific. He sat down. He looked at her. What happened? Why does something have to have happened? Because you look like a person who has something to say and is deciding whether to say it. She almost smiled. You're observant. I have a 14-year-old. You developed the skill. Patrice came. They ordered without looking at the menus. They'd both stopped looking at the menus 2 weeks ago, which was its own kind of marker. When Patrice left, Sophia put both hands flat on the table and said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you react. Daniel felt his shoulders tighten. Okay, I wasn't just fired from Meridian, she said. The official story, the board removing me after the bad acquisitions, that's true. But it's not complete. She looked at him steadily. There was a report, an internal audit. It was commissioned 18 months before the restructuring, before your layoff, before any of the acquisitions. The board had it done quietly, and the findings were not shared with me in full. She paused. I found out the details 2 years ago, during the lawsuit discovery process. The audit found that 3 senior VPs had been falsifying performance data for 2 years, making certain divisions look more profitable than they were. The board knew. They addressed it privately, quietly moved 2 of the VPs, shuffled some figures, but they didn't disclose it to me as CEO, and they didn't reverse the financial strategy that was built on the falsified data. Daniel was very still. The restructuring, she said. The 37 layoffs. The decisions I made, or thought I was making those, were based on financial projections that were built on numbers that had been manipulated. She watched his face. I'm not saying I'm blameless. I should have dug deeper. I should have asked harder questions. But the picture I was given, when I approved those cuts, was not an accurate picture. The diner noise continued around them, cups, chairs, the TV, and Daniel heard none of it. So he said slowly, you fired 37 people based on a lie, based on incomplete information that I should have demanded be more complete. Yes, and the board knew. The board knew the underlying numbers were wrong. Whether they knew specifically that the restructuring was based on falsified data, that's murkier. The lawyers went back and forth on that for months. She exhaled. What I know is that the 3 VPs who cooked the books walked away with their severance packages intact, and 37 people walked away with cardboard boxes. Something hot moved through Daniel's chest, not at Sophia, at something larger and older and harder to name. Why are you telling me this now? He said. Because you deserved to know from the beginning, and I was scared. She said it flatly, without decoration. I was scared that if I told you, you'd think I was making excuses, using it as a way to reduce my culpability, and I didn't want you to think that. I don't want to think that about myself, so I kept it back. She stopped. But keeping it back is the same thing I did 7 years ago. Not telling people the full picture because I was afraid of what they'd do with it. I'm done doing that. Daniel picked up his coffee. Looked at it. Put it down. Do the names of the VPs matter to you, he asked. One of them is running a company in Phoenix right now, she said, making $2.4 million a year. The number landed in the room like something dropped from a height. $2.4 million. And Daniel had sold his late wife's jewelry to make a mortgage payment on a house he lost anyway. Tell me his name, Daniel said. Why? Because I want to know it. It won't change anything, she said, carefully. Not like she was protecting the man, more like she was watching Daniel's face and gauging what the name might do to him. I know it won't change anything. Tell me anyway. Richard Hale, she said. Daniel repeated it quietly. Twice. The way you repeat something you want to remember. Richard Hale. He has a lawyer on retainer, Sophia said. He's been sued twice. Both times settled quietly. He's very good at being sued quietly. And the board members who knew. 2 retired. 1 is still on 2 other boards. She met his eyes. I know how this sounds. I know it sounds like I'm handing you something to be angry at, so you'll be less angry at me. Is that what you're doing? She held his gaze without blinking. No. But I understand if you can't tell the difference right now. He sat with that. He sat with Richard Hale and the 2.4 million and the 3 VPs who walked away with their severance. He sat with the image of Gerald from HR who couldn't make eye contact, and he wondered if Gerald had known, and he thought probably not. Probably Gerald was just another person reading a script handed to him by people above his clearance level. What happened to the other 2 VPs? He said. The ones who falsified the data. One is in real estate development in Florida. One left the country. He's in Portugal now, I think. Consulting. She paused. People like that tend to land. That's one of the things I had to stop being surprised by. Daniel looked up. You used to be surprised by it? I used to believe that accountability was structural, she said. That the systems we built would catch people who abused them. I believed that sincerely. She exhaled. It took losing everything to understand that the systems work very well for the people who design them, and considerably less well for everyone else. I knew that, Daniel said. I knew it before Meridian. I know. You knew it because you'd lived it. I knew it as a concept, a talking point. A TED Talk. The word landed with weight. There's a difference. Patrice brought fresh coffee without being asked. She was getting good at reading this table. She'd told Daniel last week, quietly, while Sophia was in the restroom, that she didn't know what was going on between those two, but that, whatever it was the most interesting thing happening in her section. And she hoped he'd keep coming on Thursdays. He'd left her a 30% tip. After Patrice left, Sophia said, There's one more thing. Daniel looked at her. I found 4 of them, she said. From the 37. I've been looking since I got to Millfield. People are findable if you're patient enough and you know what to look for. She reached into the pocket of her coat and put a folded pieces of paper on the table. You're one of them. You were the first one I found. That's not a coincidence that I'm here. Millfield, I mean. That's not I didn't come to find you. I need to be clear about that. I came because a woman from Cora's network told me there was cleaning work available here. But when I found out you were in Millfield, I stayed. Daniel stared at the paper on the table. He didn't reach for it. What is that? He said. The other 3 names. What I know about where they are now. Whether they're okay. You've been tracking them. I've been making sure they're okay. Or trying to. She kept her hands in her lap, not pushing the paper, letting it sit there between them. Marcus Webb, he was in Meridian's IT department. Had been there 11 years. He's in Providence now. He's working for the city. His wife had a health scare last year, and the bills were bad. I sent something anonymously. It wasn't much, but it was something. She paused. Patricia Okafor, she was in accounts. 12 years she retrained as a nurse. She finished her degree last spring. I don't know if she needed anything from me, because I couldn't find a way to check without revealing myself. She stopped. And then there's Terry Simmons. Something about the way she said it, a slight change in the weight of the name. What about Terry Simmons? Daniel said. Sophia picked up her coffee. Held it. He didn't make it, she said. He died in 2021. His wife told me I called. I said I was an old colleague. I didn't tell her who I really was. She said it was his heart, but she also said he'd never really come back after losing the job. That he went in and out of depression for 3 years and his heart gave out. She set the cup down. He was 53. He'd been at Meridian for 16 years. The diner got very quiet around Daniel. Not actually quiet, but in the way that matters. 53. 16 years. And then not making it. He looked at the table. I didn't know him well, Daniel said finally. We were in different departments. He used to bring donuts on Fridays. The good kind from the place on Weathersfield. Sophia said nothing. His wife, Daniel said. She okay? She's managing. Their kids are grown. She has a part-time job at a library. She paused. I sent her something too. Anonymously. From a money order, so it couldn't be traced. Daniel looked up. You have almost nothing. I have enough, she said quietly. For what matters. He sat there with Terry Simmons and the Donut Fridays, and a man who went in and out of depression for 3 years, and then didn't make it. He sat there with the particular weight of knowing that a story you thought ended with your own survival had not, in fact, ended there, that somewhere in its margins, there were people whose version of the story had a different conclusion. I'm going to be angry for a while, he said. At me? He thought about it. Really thought. At Richard Hale. At the board. At the whole machinery of it. He looked at her. At you less than I was. More complicated than anger at this point. Complicated is fair, she said. You should have told me this the first night. Yes, she said immediately. I should have. I'm sorry. And that apology direct, unqualified, not followed by an explanation or a justification or a however, was different from anything she'd said before. It was the apology he hadn't realized he'd been waiting for. Not for the layoff, for this specific thing, this specific withholding. Okay, he said. She looked at him carefully. Okay? Okay, I hear you. Okay, we keep going. He picked up the piece of paper, unfolded it, looked at the 3 names in her handwriting. Neat, small letters. The handwriting of someone who'd spent years signing documents. What do you want to do with this? With the 4 of us you've found? I don't know yet, she said. I know what I want to do eventually. There's a shape of it in my head. But I don't know if it's realistic. Tell me the shape. She was quiet for a moment. Something formal, she said slowly. A structure. Not just money orders and grocery bags. Something that could help people who've been displaced the way we were displaced. The way Terry was. Before they go 3 years in and out of depression and their heart gives out. Her voice was even. She'd clearly said this to herself enough times that the emotion of it had been compressed into something denser. I don't have the resources. I don't have the credibility anymore. I don't even have a proper address, but I know what it should look like. Daniel folded the paper back up. He set it on the table. He left his hand on it. Tell me more, he said. The conversation that followed lasted until Patrice came over at 15 and told them gently that she needed the booth for a large party coming in. They moved to the counter. They kept talking. Daniel called Lily and told her he was running late, that she should start her homework. That he'd explain later, and Lily, said Dad. Seriously, in the tone of a 14-year-old who is choosing to be inconvenienced, which meant she was fine. They talked about what a real support structure for displaced workers might look like. They talked about the bureaucracy of it, the nonprofit filing, the funding sources, the community partnerships. Daniel knew things about contracting, about working with city offices and county programs, about the practical architecture of getting things built in the real world. Sophia knew things about organizational structure, about what donors actually looked for, about which kinds of programs had traction, and which collapsed under their own good intentions. They were. Daniel realized somewhere around 9:40, actually good at this together. That realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. At 9:45, he finally put on his jacket. He looked at Sophia. She was still at the counter, turning her coffee cup, looking at the notes they'd scrawled on 2 paper napkins during the conversation. I need you to do something, he said. She looked up. Next Thursday, he said. Bring whatever you have. Whatever you've put together in your head about this structure. Write it out. As much as you can. Bring it here and show me. She was very still. Why? Because you spent a year organizing a supply closet in Dorchester and alphabetizing canned goods and thinking about what it means to make someone useful again. And I've spent 7 years managing construction projects that started as an idea on a napkin. He looked at her steadily. Maybe that's something. She didn't say anything for a moment. He could see what was happening in her face, the flash of something that might have been hope, and then the immediate contraction, the self-protective skepticism that comes from a person who has let themselves hope before and knows what the landing looks like. You don't have to, she said. This isn't I know it's not my responsibility, he said. I'm not doing it out of responsibility. He held her gaze. I'm doing it because Terry Simmons used to bring donuts on Fridays and he died at 53. And I have been very lucky, and I know it, and I would like to do something with that luck that means more than just surviving. Sophia's jaw tightened. Not in anger, in the way jaws tighten when a person is holding something very carefully together. Okay, she said. Finally, quietly, I'll bring it. He walked out into the cold. He drove to the apartment. Went upstairs. Found Lily at the kitchen table, doing homework with her headphones on, music leaking out into the room. She pulled one side off when she heard him. You okay? Fine, he said. Good, actually. She studied him with those dark eyes that missed nothing. You seem different. Different how? I don't know. She searched for the word. Less like you're holding your breath. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway of his small apartment and looked at his daughter, who was smarter than he deserved, and said, "Maybe I am." Less? She put the headphone back on and returned to her homework. Daniel went to the kitchen. He started the late dinner, just eggs. Just simple, and he stood at the stove and thought about Terry Simmons and Richard Hale, and a woman in a torn coat who had gone back through 37 files and memorized the number of days each person had left. He thought about what it meant to be useful, what it meant to build something from a place of wreckage, what it meant to decide not that the past didn't matter, not that the damage wasn't real, but that the next thing you built would carry the weight of what you'd learned from losing everything. He thought about the napkins, with the notes on them. He'd put them in his jacket pocket, without thinking about it. He reached in now, and found them, unfolded them, smoothed them out on the counter beside the stove. Sophia's handwriting and his own, mixed together on 2 paper napkins from the Millfield diner. He stood there looking at them for a long time, while the eggs cooked. The next week moved differently than any week he'd had in years. He found himself making notes at the job site. Not construction notes, but the other kind. How many people in his crew had come to him after losing other work? How many of them had needed a specific kind of hand-up rather than a handout? How the county workforce development office worked, and where its gaps were. He called an old contact at the Hartford Trades Alliance who owed him a favor and asked some general question about nonprofit registration in Connecticut, framing it as curiosity about a thing he'd read somewhere. And his contact gave him the information and asked no further questions, because people who owe you favors are judicious. On Wednesday night he sat at the kitchen table, after Lily went to bed, and he did something he had not done in 7 years. He opened the box. The desk belongings from Meridian. A coffee mug that said "World's Most Okay Employee" that Lily had given him for Father's Day when she was 5. His employee badge. A small cactus completely dead, shriveled, that he'd kept alive for 3 years on his desk, and hadn't thought about until this moment. A performance review from 2016 where someone had written in the comments, "Daniel consistently demonstrates an unusual capacity to see solutions before others see the problem." A family photo, him and Lily at the beach, the summer before Julia left, when Lily was 6, and the world was still recognizable. He sat with each of these things. He didn't cry. He was past the crying that had happened in private, in the dark months, in the shower at the Gentle on Marsh Street when Lily was asleep, and he let it happen, quickly and quietly, and then stopped. He was past that. But he sat with them. He let them be what they were, artifacts of a life that had existed, that had been taken apart, that had been rebuilt into something that didn't look the same, but was in some ways stronger. He put the photo on the kitchen table. He put the mug in the cabinet. He threw away the dead cactus without ceremony. He left the badge in the box. He closed the box. Then he put it in the recycling. Not the trash, the recycling. He didn't know why that distinction mattered to him. Maybe it was just about the idea that even the things you were done carrying could become something else. He went to bed. For the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, he went to bed without a size. Thursday arrived. He walked into the diner, and Sophia was there before him again. And this time there were papers on the table, real papers, not napkins. 3 pages, covered in her small, neat handwriting. She looked up when he walked in, and her expression was the most unguarded he'd seen it. Open and frightened, the way people look when they've put something real on the table and aren't sure yet what's going to happen to it. Daniel sat down. He looked at the papers. He looked at her. "You did it," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "I wrote for 2 nights. He picked up the first page. He started reading. Patrice appeared, poured coffee, disappeared. Daniel read. The diner moved around them. It was good. Not polished, her language was still corporate in places, still reflexively institutional in some of the framing, but the bones of it were good. The concept was sound. The target population was clearly defined. The gap in existing services was accurately identified. She'd mapped it against 3 similar programs in other states and analyzed where each had succeeded and where each had stalled. She had been underneath everything, very good at her job. He set the papers down. "This is real," he said. She watched his face. "You think it could work?" "I think it's the beginning of something that could work," he said carefully. "Which is more than I thought walking in here." Something shifted in her face. Not quite relief, more like the first breath after a long underwater passage. "There are things missing," he said. "The funding mechanism is vague. The governance structure needs more." "I know," she said. "I know what's missing. I ran out of space and I ran out of night. How many more nights do you think you need?" She blinked. "What?" "To finish it," he said. "How many more nights?" She stared at him. He could see the exact moment she understood what he was asking. Not how long will this take, but are we actually going to do this? Are these napkins and papers and Thursday conversations going to become a real thing in the real world? "Daniel," she said carefully. "I know," he said. "I know what this is, and I know what I'm saying." "Why?" she said. Not suspicious. Genuinely asking. "After everything." He thought about Terry Simmons. He thought about the box in the recycling. He thought about Lily saying less, like you're holding your breath. "Because I opened the box," he said. She looked at him. She didn't understand the reference. He didn't explain it. "Because it's time," he said instead. "For both of us, I think." She picked up her coffee. She held it in both hands. And she said quietly, and without qualification, "Then we build it." They said we build it on a Thursday night in November, and by the following Monday morning, Daniel already regretted it. Not because he'd changed his mind, but because he'd told Lily. He hadn't planned to. He'd planned to keep it contained, just a thing he was working on, just a project, just something that might or might not become real. But Lily had found the 3 pages of Sophia's notes on the kitchen table Saturday morning, while Daniel was in the shower. And by the time he came out, she was sitting there with all 3 pages read, and her eyes doing the math he recognized, because it was his own look in a 14-year-old's face. "Dad," she said. "Who wrote this?" He stood in the kitchen doorway with a towel around his shoulders and made the split-second decision that lying to Lily was always more expensive than the truth. "A woman I've been talking to," he said. "Someone I know from work. Old work." Lily looked at the pages, then at him. "This is about what happened to you. At that company." "Yes. And other people like you." "Yes." She set the papers down carefully, the way she handled things she considered serious. "Are you going to do it?" "I'm thinking about it, Dad." She looked at him with the particular directness she'd inherited from no one he could identify. It had just appeared in her somewhere around age 9 and never left. "Are you going to do it?" He dried his face with the towel. "Yeah," he said, "I think I am." She nodded once, slowly. "Okay." She picked up her cereal bowl. She went back to eating. And then, almost as an afterthought, she must be something. This woman. Daniel said nothing. Lily smiled into her cereal. He regretted telling her, immediately, and also he was glad he had, because Lily's reaction had done something specific to the project in his mind, moved it from the category of thing I'm considering to the category of thing that is happening. His daughter's quiet nod of approval had the same effect on him it always had. It made things real. The first obstacle arrived that same Monday, which was when Daniel called the county nonprofit registration office to ask about the filing process. Boat, a woman named Donna, put him on hold for 11 minutes and then told him the earliest available consultation appointment was 6 weeks out. 6 weeks, he called Sophia. This was also new. They'd exchanged numbers the previous Thursday, practically, without discussion, because they were planning something that required more than weekly diner conversations. When she picked up, she sounded like she'd been awake for a while. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who'd already been working. 6 weeks for a consultation, he said. "I know," she said. "I already looked into it. There's a workaround, a fiscal sponsorship arrangement with an existing nonprofit. We operate under their umbrella while we file independently. It extends the timeline by about 3 months on the back end, but lets us start receiving funding sooner." He paused. "You looked into this already." "I couldn't sleep again." "Sophia, I know. I know. But the fiscal sponsorship is the right move anyway, not just the faster one. It gives us credibility we don't have yet. Donors don't give to an idea on paper. They give to a track record or to a credible umbrella. She paused. I reached out to 2 organizations this morning. One in Hartford, one in New Haven. The Hartford one has a program coordinator named James Whitfield who knows what fiscal sponsorship is, without me having to explain it, which already puts him ahead of everyone else I've talked to. Daniel stood in the parking lot of his job site with his breath clouding in the cold and tried to calibrate what he was hearing. 6 days ago they'd said we billed it over cold coffee at the Millfield Diner. This woman had been on the phone with program coordinators in Hartford since apparently before sunrise. Slow down, he said. Silence. I don't mean stop, he said. I mean we need to move together on this. If you're 3 steps ahead and making calls, I need to know what calls you're making. A pause. You're right, she said. I'm sorry, I do this. I always, when I can see how something should work, I move. I've always moved fast and asked forgiveness rather than permission. I noticed, he said. It's going to be a problem if we're actually partnering on this. I know, she was quiet for a moment. Old habits from the CEO days. Decision, execution, review. No committee, no consensus. We're a committee of 2, he said. And you don't get to outvote me. She almost laughed. He could hear it, the suppressed version of it. Understood. Call me before you call anyone else, he said. That's the one rule. One rule, she repeated. I can do that. He hung up and went back to the job site and spent the rest of the day thinking about fiscal sponsorship and James Whitfield in Hartford and the particular problem of a woman who moved faster than she talked about it. That night he did his own research. He looked up fiscal sponsorship models, looked up the Hartford organization Sophia had mentioned, looked up James Whitfield, and found a LinkedIn profile and a photo of a broad-shouldered man in his 40s with a direct expression and a bio that mentioned 15 years in workforce development. He texted Sophia. Whitfield looks solid. Set up the call. Let me know when. She texted back within 30 seconds, already on his calendar. Thursday at 2. Can you do that? He looked at his schedule. Thursday at 2, he had a contractor meeting. He could reschedule. Yes, he typed. 3 dots appeared, then Daniel. Yeah. Thank you. For the one rule. I needed someone to give me one rule. He stared at that text for a moment. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went to help Lily with the Chopin. She still hadn't fully cracked, and he sat beside her on the piano bench and listened to her work through the hard left-hand passage over and over and over. And he thought, this is what patience looks like. This is what it sounds like when you don't give up on the difficult thing. The call with James Whitfield happened Thursday morning, 2 days before their regular diner meeting, because things were moving faster than Thursdays could contain. Daniel sat in his truck in the parking lot of the hardware store, with his phone on speaker and Sophia's number conferenced in. And James Whitfield's voice came through with the measured cadence of a man who had heard many pitches and had very good filters. He listened. He asked good questions. He asked about the target population, about geographic scope, about what success looked like at 12 months and at 3 years. He asked about funding strategy and about the 2 of them not invasively, but the way a careful person assesses who they're actually dealing with. And then he said, Ms. Bennett, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. Go ahead, Sophia said. Your name, your professional history, it's going to come up. Meridian Group, and what happened there is public record. If we attach our organization's sponsorship to this, our board will ask about it. What do you tell them? The pause was only 2 seconds, but Daniel felt every millisecond of it. I tell them the truth, Sophia said. I was the CEO who signed the layoffs. I was also the CEO who was working from falsified financial data that I should have interrogated more aggressively. I failed those 37 people through a combination of deception by my own leadership team and a failure of my own due diligence. I lost everything after the company, the money, my credibility, and I spent several years rebuilding my understanding of what I did and why it was wrong. She paused. And now I am trying to build something that addresses the specific harm I caused, in partnership with one of the people I harmed. That's the truth. If your board decides it's disqualifying, I understand. James Whitfield was quiet for a moment. "The partnership with Mr. Carter," he said. That's not a standard part of this kind of origin story." "No," Sophia said, "it's not." "How do you describe it?" he asked. "The two of you, working together." Daniel spoke before he'd fully decided to. "Complicated," he said. "And the most honest thing either of us has done in a long time." Another pause from Whitfield. "And then, I'd like to present this to my board. Can you both be available for a follow-up call in 2 weeks?" They both said yes simultaneously, and when the call ended, the silence on the line for 2 seconds, before Sophia hung up, felt like something shared. Like two people standing on the same piece of ground and realizing it was solid. At the Thursday diner that week, they didn't talk much about the call. They'd both processed it privately and arrived already past it, already on to the next problem, which was a name for the organization and a one-page summary document that James Whitfield's board would need to review before the follow-up call. They sat across from each other with their food and a yellow legal pad Daniel had bought at the hardware store, and they worked through naming options like two people who had done this before in some other configuration, in some other life, and were finding that the skills transferred. "It can't have meridian in it," Daniel said. "God knows," Sophia said. "It shouldn't be abstract," he said. "Not some foundation name that doesn't tell you what it does. It should say what it is." "Forward something," she said. "Forward footing. Forward ground. Those sound like insurance companies." "Fair." She tapped the pen against the pad. "It's about getting back to solid ground after the floor goes out. That's the core of it." "Second floor foundation," he said. Then immediately, "No. Terrible. Steady something. Steady start. Sounds like a baby product." She looked at him. He looked at her. And simultaneously they both almost laughed. Really laughed, not the suppressed almost version. And it was the first time that had happened, and it changed something in the room between them. "We're terrible at names," she said. "We are," he agreed. They were still trying names when Patrice came over and said, without being asked, "You two look like you're trying to name something." They looked at her. "We are," Daniel said. "What's it for?" she said. He explained it briefly. 2 minutes. The program for displaced workers, the support structure, the gap in existing services. Patrice listened with her coffee pot hanging from one hand. When he finished, she said, "My husband lost his job at the paper mill in 2015. We had 3 kids and a mortgage, and I was working doubles here to keep the lights on, and there was nothing. No program, no bridge, nothing that actually helped with the specific of what we needed." She paused. "What would you have called that? What you needed then?" Patrice thought for a moment. Then she simply, "A lifeline." The word landed. Daniel wrote it on the pad. Sophia looked at it. They looked at each other. "The Lifeline Initiative," Sophia said quietly. Daniel tried it in his mouth. "The Lifeline Initiative." He set the pen down. "That's it." Patrice refilled their cups and walked away. She'd been there for the naming of a nonprofit, and she went back to her section, like it was any other Thursday. That was the moment. That was the one they both remembered later, when people asked how it started, when reporters asked for the origin story. Not that diner the first night, not the confrontation across the table, not the papers with the 3 pages of Sophia's handwriting. It was Patrice with the coffee pot, saying a lifeline, and 2 people writing it on a yellow legal pad. The weeks that followed were the most complicated of Daniel's adult life, and that included the months after Julia left and the months after the layoff. Because this was complicated in a different register, not the complexity of survival, but the complexity of building. And building with Sophia Bennett, specifically, came with its own particular friction. She moved fast. He'd known that. But living it, working inside it, was different from knowing it in the abstract. She would have an idea at 7 in the morning and have made 3 calls about it by 8 and be ready to execute by noon. Daniel's instinct was to slow that sequence down, to think it through, to check it against the plan, to make sure the foundation was right before building the walls. They clashed about this no fewer than 4 times in the first 3 weeks. Not loud clashes, neither of them were loud, but the kind of friction that builds heat slowly. The worst one happened on a Tuesday evening in December, 3 weeks after the Whitfield call. Sophia had met with a potential donor, a woman named Carol Evers, a retired executive who'd given to workforce development programs before, without telling Daniel first. She'd met with her, pitched the Lifeline initiative, and come away with a commitment of $10,000 contingent on the non-profit status being finalized. Daniel found out when Sophia texted him, "Carol Evers is in. 10,000 conditional on filing." He called her back in 60 seconds. "You went without me," he said. "She had a narrow window and you were on a job site." "You went without me," he said again. Not louder, heavier. A silence. "Yes," she said. "That was the one rule, Sophia. I know. $10,000 is real money and a real commitment, and I don't know this woman, and I don't know what you told her, and now we have a donor who has a relationship with you and not with me. And if something goes wrong between you and her, I have no standing." "You're right," she said. "You're completely right. And I knew it when I took the meeting, and I took it anyway." He stopped. Why? She was quiet for long enough that he thought she was going to qualify it, or justify it, or do the thing she'd done early on, perform the correct answer before she actually had it. Instead, she said, "Because I am still more comfortable operating alone. Even when I don't want to be. Even when I know it's wrong. The reflex is faster than the intention." The honesty of it diffused something. "This is the thing that's going to break us," he said. "If it breaks this specific thing." "I know," she said. "You have to mean the one rule. Not perform meaning it." "I know, Daniel. Because I'm putting real things into this. My time, my contacts, my name. And I won't be in a partnership where I'm the last to know. I know." And then quietly, "I'm sorry." Not the kind of sorry that's trying to close the conversation. The kind that means I have to actually change something. He breathed. "Are we still?" "Yes," he said. "We're still." He hung up and sat in his truck in the cold for a while. He thought about what it meant to trust someone who had broken your trust once before in a different way. Not the same way. This wasn't the conference room. This wasn't a decision made without regard for consequence. This was a woman who moved faster than her intentions, and was trying, genuinely trying, to slow down enough to do it differently. The question was whether trying was enough or whether the pattern was too deep. He didn't have the answer. He just knew that what they were building was worth the friction of figuring it out. The board meeting with Whitfield's organization happened on a Wednesday afternoon in Hartford, 3 weeks before Christmas. They drove up together, Daniel's truck, Sophia in the passenger seat, and it was the first time they'd been in a contained space together. And the geometry of it was strange. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just close. More intimate than a diner booth, in the way that a vehicle always is, because there's no direction to look that isn't each other. Sophia had her notes. She'd sent them to Daniel 2 days before, and he'd sent back edits, and she'd incorporated every one of them, which had surprised him, and then not surprised him. Because she was many things, but she was not someone who let her ego interfere with a document being correct. She was wearing a blazer he hadn't seen before. Not new, it had the careful look of something vintage, something found and cleaned and pressed. But it was a blazer, and it was her armor, and it meant she was ready. He was wearing the Navy suit. The same one from the Meridian conference room, the one he'd worn to his sister's wedding, still slightly tight in the shoulders. He'd put it on and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and thought, "This is what it looks like when you take a thing that hurt you and walk back into the room wearing it." The board was 8 people. James Whitfield sat at the end of the table with an expression that was encouraging but not committed. The board asked the same question Whitfield had asked on the call, and then harder ones. They asked about the Meridian history directly, the way Whitfield had predicted they would, and Sophia answered the way she had on the call directly, without the qualifications that would have made it easier to hear, but less true. And then a woman named Adrian, who was the board chair and who had silver hair and the eyes of someone who had heard every version of every pitch, leaned forward and said, "Mr. Carter, you were one of the 37. "Yes," he said. "And you're here, building this, with the person who signed the order." "Yes." "Help me understand that," she said. "Because it's either the most compelling thing I've heard in a boardroom in 10 years, or it's a performance. And I need to know which. Daniel looked at her. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the table. It was his Meridian employee badge. He'd taken it out of the box the night he brought the box to the recycling. He'd held it for a moment, and then put it in his jacket pocket, and he hadn't been able to explain why, but now he understood. 7 years ago, I walked out of a building with this, and a box of my things, and a severance check, and 54 fewer days of retirement vesting than I'd needed to be secure, he said. I spent 6 months in a darkness I don't talk about. I lost my house. My daughter changed schools. I sold her mother's jewelry. He paused. I carried this badge in a box in my garage for 7 years because I couldn't throw it away. I couldn't figure out what to do with the anger inside it. He looked at the badge on the table. I moved it to my pocket 3 weeks ago. Because I was done letting it be a monument to the worst thing that happened to me and ready to let it be the reason I built something. The boardroom was very quiet. That's not a performance, he said. That's just what happened. Adrian looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the badge. She looked at Sophia. And then she sat back. Give us 20 minutes, she said. They waited in a hallway. Neither of them said anything. Daniel looked at the floor. Sophia looked at the wall. Their arms were almost touching, and neither of them moved to close the distance or to widen it. After 17 minutes, James Whitfield opened the door. They voted, he said. Daniel made himself look up. 7-1 in favor, Whitfield said. The Lifeline Initiative has fiscal sponsorship. Conditional on the formal documents, which we can have drafted in 2 weeks. Sophia put her hand over her mouth. Daniel nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when things were real and too large for any other response. They drove back to Millfield in the dark. The heat in Daniel's truck was the same as always, a little too warm on the left, a little too cool on the right, and Sophia held her notes in her lap, and neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then she said, the badge. Yeah, you planned that. No, he said. I didn't. I've had it in my pocket for 3 weeks. Tonight it just made sense. She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. Daniel. I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear it as something true, and not as something strategic. He glanced at her. Okay. When you put that badge on the table, she said, I thought for the first time since everything fell apart, I thought this is what repair looks like. Not forgiveness. Not resolution. Just 2 people taking the wreckage of something terrible and choosing, with full knowledge of what it cost, to build something from it. Her voice was very steady. I've wanted to build something real for 3 years. I've thought about it every day, and every day, I ran out of the thing you put on that table tonight. He looked at the road. What's that? He said. Proof, she said quietly, that the thing you're building is true. They were quiet for the rest of the drive. Daniel pulled up in front of the building on Delwood, where Sophia had her room. He put the truck in park. The engine idled. She gathered her notes. She reached for the door. Hey, he said. She looked at him. Carol Evers, he said. The donor you met without me. She stiffened slightly. Daniel set up a call, he said. For next week. All 3 of us. She was still. We're going to need more donors, he said. You're better at the pitch than I am. But I need to be in the room. He paused. We're partners. That means I'm in the room. She held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her face, something that was not quite gratitude and not quite relief, and was maybe the specific thing that happens when a person has been given another chance at something they already failed once and knows it. I'll set it up, she said. She got out of the truck. She walked to the building door without looking back. Daniel waited until the door closed behind her. Then he put the truck in drive. He got home at 9:40. Lily was asleep school night. 10 o'clock. She was good about it most of the time. He stood in her doorway for a moment. She was on her side with her arm over the edge of the bed the way she'd slept, since she was a toddler, sheet music on the floor from where she'd been studying it before she fell asleep. He picked up the sheet music. He set it on her desk. He went to the kitchen. He stood at the counter and wrote 2 things on a notepad. The first was, Carol Evers call next week. All 3. The second was a name he hadn't let himself write down yet. He wrote it slowly, in his own handwriting, on the paper, Terry Simmons. He looked at it for a long time. Then he wrote below it, "This one's for you." He folded the paper and put it in his wallet behind his driver's license. Not as a monument, as a reason. The way you carry a reason when you need to remember, on the hard days, what you're actually building toward. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He did not brace. The Carol Evers call happened on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January, and it almost destroyed everything they'd built before it even had a name on a door. Daniel had been on time. He'd pulled up the conferencing app, he'd tested his audio, he'd had his notes open and his questions ready, and his coffee made. He'd been professional and prepared in the specific way that men who have rebuilt themselves from nothing learn to be professional. Not because it comes naturally, but because they know what it costs when it doesn't. Sophia had been on time too. And Carol Evers had been on time, and she was exactly what her LinkedIn photo had suggested. A woman in her mid-60s, with sharp eyes and the kind of composed manner that meant she'd been in enough rooms to stop being impressed by rooms. The first 10 minutes went well. Daniel introduced himself, explained his role in the Lifeline initiative, explained his history with Meridian briefly, factually, without editorializing, and Carol listened and asked 2 good questions and seemed satisfied with both answers. The partnership between him and Sophia, she said, was unusual but compelling. She'd done some research after Sophia's first meeting with her. She'd read what she could find about the Meridian restructuring. She said, she appreciated the transparency, and then she said, "I want to ask about governance." "Of course," Sophia said. Specifically, Carol said, "I want to understand who has final decision-making authority in this organization. Because when I give money to something, I need to know who's driving." And Sophia said, without hesitation, without looking at Daniel, or at least, without Daniel being able to see her look at him, "Because it was a phone call, the board will have final authority on major decisions. Daniel and I share operational leadership." It was the right answer. It was the accurate answer. It was also the first time Daniel had heard Sophia describe their operational structure in those specific terms out loud to another person. And something about hearing her say it, "Daniel and I share," did something to the architecture of what he understood this to be. After the call ended, he sat with the phone in his hand for a minute. Then he texted her, "Good call." She texted back, "You were better than me on the history section." He thought about that. "Then we were the same." 3 dots. "Then yes, we were." He put the phone down and went back to the job site. But he carried, "We were the same" through the rest of the afternoon, the way you carry a thing that's shifted something without your full permission. January moved fast. Faster than Daniel had expected, because the Lifeline initiative stopped being an idea on paper and started being a thing that required specific actions on specific days, and those days came whether you were ready or not. The fiscal sponsorship paperwork came through in the 3rd week of January. James Whitfield's organization, the Hartford Community Foundation for Working Families, was officially listed as their sponsoring entity, which meant they could begin accepting donations under that umbrella while their independent filing processed. Carol Evers' $10,000 landed in the account 4 days after the paperwork cleared. Sophia called Daniel when she saw the confirmation. She called him before she did anything else, which he noticed and did not say out loud, because some things are better received as demonstration than as acknowledgement. "It's real," she said. Her voice was very quiet, not celebratory, the specific quiet of a person for whom something real has just become more real than they'd let themselves fully believe it would. "It's the beginning of real," he said. 10,000 is enough to start. Not enough to sustain. I know. I have 3 more calls this week. Tell me who before you call them." "Already planned to," she said. "And then, Daniel, I want to hire someone." He paused. "With $10,000, part-time, a program coordinator. Someone who can manage the intake process when we start taking clients. I can't do intake and fundraising and administration simultaneously. Not at the level they need to be done." "Who did you have in mind?" A pause. Not the evasive kind. The kind where someone is about to say something they've thought through carefully. "There's a woman named Rosa Delgado. She runs a food bank volunteer network in Bridgeport. I've been talking to her informally for about 3 weeks. She understands the population we're trying to serve. She has case management experience. She's looking for something new. 3 weeks, he said. I know. You've been talking to her for 3 weeks without telling me. I wasn't recruiting her, Sophia said, careful and clear. I was talking to her. Getting information. Learning the field. The moment it became recruitment, a moment I thought about actually asking her, I told you. He chewed on the distinction. It was a genuine distinction. It was also the narrowest version of compliance with the one rule he could imagine. And he needed her to know he saw that. That's the edge of the rule, he said. Not over it, but right at the edge. I know, she said. I'll set it further from the edge next time. Okay. I want to talk to Rosa before any offer. I'll set it up for this week. Rosa Delgado turned out to be one of those people who make you feel, within 3 minutes of meeting them, that they have been doing the right thing in the right way their whole professional life and simply need the right structure to do more of it. She was 47, compact and direct, with the kind of practical intelligence that comes from years of working in under-resourced environments where you don't have the luxury of inefficiency. She asked better questions than most people Daniel had worked with at any level. She asked about the client journey, specifically about what happened to someone in the first 72 hours after a layoff, and whether the Lifeline initiative had a model for early intervention. That's the window, she said. 72 hours. That's when people make the decisions that determine the next 6 months. Whether they reach out or go quiet. Whether they tell their family or start hiding it. Whether they start looking or start drowning. She paused. Most programs catch people at 90 days or 6 months, when they're already in the harder place. The smart move is earlier. Daniel and Sophia looked at each other. That's the model, Sophia said. Early intervention. 72-hour outreach protocol. I know, Rosa said. That's why I'm interested in this. They offered her the part-time coordinator role before she left the building. She accepted before she reached her car. Daniel knew because he was watching from the window, and he saw her stop on the sidewalk and pull out her phone, and he thought she was calling someone to tell them, which meant she'd already decided before she walked in. That was the 3rd week of January. By the 1st week of February, the Lifeline initiative had a fiscal sponsor, 1 confirmed donor, a part-time program coordinator, a detailed intake protocol Rosa had drafted in 4 days, and a shared office space Daniel had negotiated through a contact at the Millfield Community Center, free for 6 months in exchange for Daniel's crew doing some deferred maintenance work on the building. It had also, by that point, acquired a story. Daniel didn't know how it got out. He suspected Patrice, though he never asked her and she never confirmed it. But somehow the story of the two of them, the diner, the leftover burger, the woman who'd come to the end of the road, and the man who'd handed her a bowl of soup instead of a closed door had moved through Millfield, the way small-town stories move, which is quietly and completely. By the time a reporter from the Hartford Courant called Daniel's cell phone on a Thursday morning in February, the story had apparently already made 2 rounds of the county's social media community and been shared enough times that the reporter had 3 independent sources and was calling to confirm details, not to break news. Daniel stood on the job site with his phone in his hand and the reporter's voice in his ear and felt the specific vertigo of a private thing becoming public. I need to call you back, he said. Give me an hour. He called Sophia. Hartford Courant, he said. They know the whole story. A silence of it. The diner, the leftovers. Meridian. The initiative. He paused. They might know about Terry Simmons. Her breath on the line. Daniel. I know. What do you want to do, she said. I want to know what you want to do, he said. Because it's your history that gets complicated. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking, not the performance of thinking, but the real thing, the actual work of a person weighing something important. I want to talk to them, she said. On the record. I'm done managing the story by staying out of it. That's what I did for 3 years after Meridian, and it didn't protect me. It just meant everyone else got to define what happened. If you go on the record, he said, everything comes out. The VPs. Richard Hale. Good, she said. And the flatness of it, the complete absence of hesitation, told him she'd been ready for this, longer than she'd had anyone to say it to. "Okay," he said. "We talked to them together, or not at all." "Together," she said immediately. "Call them back." The article ran on a Sunday in the third week of February. It was longer than Daniel had expected, 1,200 words, with a photograph of the two of them at the Millfield Community Center, where the Lifeline office was taking shape. Sophia, in the blazer she'd worn to the Hartford board meeting. Daniel in his work jacket, standing next to each other in a room that still smelled like fresh paint. The reporter had done her homework. She had the Meridian history, the restructuring, the class action, the falsified data, and the 3 VPs who had walked away intact. She had Richard Hale's current title and salary, which she'd confirmed independently. She had Terry Simmons' name with his widow's permission, she'd noted in the article. And Daniel had not known Sophia had called Terry's wife again, had not known she'd asked permission, had not known she'd had that conversation. And when he read that detail, he had to put the paper down for a minute. He called Sophia. "Terry's wife," he said. "Margaret," Sophia said. "Yes. When did you call her?" 2 weeks ago, when I knew the article was going to happen." A pause. "I didn't want her to find out from a newspaper. And I didn't want Terry's name used without someone who loved him, saying it was okay." He sat with that. "What did she say?" he said. "When you told her who you were?" Sophia was quiet for a long moment. "She knew," she said. "She already knew. She'd looked up the Meridian layoffs after Terry died. She knew my name." Another pause. She was quiet for about 30 seconds after I identified myself. And then she said, "Are you calling to apologize?" And I said, "Partly. But mostly I'm calling because I'm building something, and your husband's name should be part of how it gets told." And she said, Sophia stopped. "What did she say?" Daniel said. She said, "He would have liked that. He was always the guy who brought donuts." The line was quiet. Daniel pressed his thumb and forefinger against his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. "Yeah," he said. He was. The article broke something open. The phone number listed for the Lifeline Initiative, Rosa's direct line, carefully set up in advance, had 47 messages by Sunday evening. By Monday morning, it had 112. Not all of them were people seeking services. Some were people who wanted to donate. Some were people who wanted to volunteer. Some were people who had their own Meridian story, or their own version of it, a different company, a different city, the same cardboard box, and the same dark months, and the same question about what you do when the floor goes out. And 3 of them were from people Daniel recognized. Marcus Webb called on Monday afternoon. He introduced himself to Rosa, and she patched him through to Daniel. And Marcus Webb's voice, after 7 years, was different, deeper. More settled, but still recognizably the same man who'd worked in IT on the 4th floor and always had a good password joke. "I read the article," Marcus said. "I'm in Providence. I don't know if you knew that." "I knew," Daniel said. "Sophia told me." A pause. "She's been keeping tabs. She's been making sure people are okay." Another pause. Longer. "Daniel, I have a wife and 2 kids, and I work for the city of Providence, and I've got my head above water. I'm okay. But I remember March of 2018 very clearly, and I want you to know that what you're building is the thing that would have changed everything for me in that first year." His voice went rough at the edges. "So if you need anything from me, anything, I'm in." Daniel gripped the phone. "I'll tell Sophia." "Tell her," Marcus stopped. "Then tell her I'm not angry anymore. I was for a long time. But I'm not." Daniel relayed it verbatim. Sophia received it without visible reaction. But her jaw did the thing it did when she was holding something carefully, and she nodded once and then walked to the window of the Lifeline office and stood there for a minute with her back to the room. Rosa watched her, then looked at Daniel. He shook his head slightly. "Let her have it." The second person who called was Patricia Okafor. She'd seen the article shared in a nursing community Facebook group. She had finished her nursing degree, she said, and she was working in a hospital in New Haven. And she wanted to come volunteer on weekends. And she didn't want anything for it except to be useful. In the same way Sophia had described in the article, the way that woman Cora had made Sophia useful, by giving her something real to do. The third call was from a lawyer. Not a good kind. A man named David Kessler, representing Richard Hale, called on Tuesday morning and informed Rosa, who immediately got Sophia, who immediately got Daniel on a three-way call. That Mr. Hale was considering legal action related to defamatory statements made about him in the Hartford Courant article. Daniel heard the words and felt something cold and clear move through him. Not fear. Something more like the specific crystalline calm of a person who has been hit before and knows that the hit didn't kill them. He's not going to sue, Sophia said the moment the call with Kessler ended. How do you know? Because everything in that article was verified and documented, and the reporter's editor signed off on it, and Richard Hale's attorney knows that a lawsuit means discovery, and discovery means his falsified financial data becomes a public court record that the press can access. She said it rapidly, with the efficiency of someone reciting something they've already thought through completely. He's trying to scare us into retracting or going quiet. He's done it before. It's his move. What's our move? Daniel said. Nothing, she said. We don't retract. We don't apologize. We don't respond to the lawyer at all. We document the call. We send it to the Courant's legal team as a courtesy, and we go back to work. You're sure? I've been waiting for this call for 3 years, she said. I knew it was coming the moment I agreed to go on the record. I've been legally prepared for it for 2 weeks. He looked at her. You hired a lawyer. I consulted with one. Yes. Before we did the interview. Yes. You didn't tell me. She met his gaze. I know. I'm telling you now. He breathed. Edge of the rule again. No, she said. That one was over it. I'm sorry. He held the look for a moment. Then he said, send me the lawyer's contact information. Already in your email. He picked up his phone. Found the email. Put his phone back down. We go back to work, he said. They went back to work. By the first week of March, the Lifeline Initiative had received its independent nonprofit status, moved out from under the fiscal sponsorship, opened a proper bank account, and taken on its first 4 clients. Rosa ran the intake. Sophia handled the donor relationships. Daniel managed the organizational infrastructure and the community partner employment agencies, the city workforce office, the legal aid organizations they were referring people to. They had $17,000 in the bank and 41 people on the waiting list. And one Thursday evening in early March, Daniel walked into the Millfield diner and found something he hadn't expected. Sophia was already there. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise was the person sitting across from her, a woman in her late 50s with gray-streaked hair and the careful, composed demeanor of someone who has cried a great deal in private and learned to hold herself steady in public. Sophia stood when she saw Daniel. Margaret called this afternoon, she said. She drove up from Wethersfield. Margaret Simmons looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were direct and calm. She stood and held out her hand, and when Daniel shook it, he felt the specific quality of a handshake from a person who is carrying something large and has carried it long enough to have found the grip. I wanted to see it, she said. What you're building? I read the article, and I saw Terry's name, and I thought I have to go see the room where this started. Daniel pulled out a chair. He sat down. Patrice appeared and poured without being asked, and disappeared without commentary, because Patrice always knew. He would have been 56 next month, Margaret said. She wasn't crying. She wasn't performing composure either. She was just present, the way some people are, the way grief eventually teaches you to be present when there's nothing else to do. He used to say that if he ever lost his job, he'd open a donut shop. He said it as a joke, but I always thought he meant it a little. Sophia said, he would have been good at it. Margaret looked at her. The look was not warm, but it was not cold either. It was something specific and unsentimental, the look of a woman who has made a decision about how to hold this person and is holding her exactly that way. I don't forgive you, Margaret said to Sophia, quietly, without cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here for that. I know, Sophia said, but I also don't think you are the whole story of what happened to Terry. I've had a long time to think about it, and there were a lot of hands in that. She paused. What you're building, this lifeline thing, if it catches one person in that 72-hour window that Rosa talks about, if it catches one person before they go quiet and go under, then Terry's name on it means something. She looked at Daniel. That's why I came. Daniel's throat was tight. He worked with it. "Thank you," he said, "for coming. I'd like to volunteer," she said. "If you need people. I worked in HR for 20 years. I know how the systems work and where they fail people." He looked at Sophia. Sophia looked at him. Something passed between them that didn't need words. "We need people," Daniel said. "We need exactly you." Margaret nodded. She sat back. She picked up the coffee Patrice had put in front of her and held it in both hands, the way Sophia had done on the very first night, the way people do when they need something warm to hold on to. The three of them sat there for a while. They talked about the intake process and Margaret's HR experience and the specific points of failure she'd seen, the moments when the corporate machinery had lost sight of the human being, and how those moments could be anticipated and interrupted. She was precise and knowledgeable, and the kind of useful that doesn't announce itself. After an hour, she stood to go. She put on her coat. She shook Daniel's hand again, and then she stood in front of Sophia for a moment. And Sophia stood, and there was a pause long enough to hold everything that was in it. And Margaret said, "I'll see you next week then." "Next week," Sophia said. Margaret left. The diner settled back into itself. Patrice refilled their cups. The TV was low. Outside, it was beginning to snow, the first real snow of March, which in New England always arrives like a reminder that spring is earned. Daniel looked at the table, at his cup, at Sophia's hands, which were still around her coffee, which were steadier than they'd been the first night. A lot steadier. "She's not going to forgive you," he said. "I know. That's going to have to be okay." "It is," Sophia said. "It already is. Some things don't get to be forgiven. They get to be lived with and built from. That's still something." He nodded slowly. "What about you?" she said. He looked up. "Daniel," she said quietly, "what about you? Is it okay? Is this something you can live with? All of it?" He thought about the box in the recycling. He thought about the badge on the conference table in Hartford. He thought about Terry Simmons and the Donut Fridays and the name folded behind his driver's license. He thought about Lily saying, "Less like you're holding your breath." He thought about the word lifeline coming from Patrice with a coffee pot on a Thursday night. "Yeah," he said. "It's something I can live with." He paused. "More than that." Sophia looked at him. Something in her face was very open, more open than he'd seen it, more open than the conference room version could have imagined, more open than even the woman in the torn coat asking for leftovers had let herself be. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay, that first night, when I asked for your leftovers." She held his gaze. "What would have happened if you'd just given them to me? The actual leftovers." And walked out. He thought about it honestly. "I'd have driven home feeling like I'd won something," he said. "And then I'd have felt terrible about it around the highway exit. And I'd have never seen you again. And the initiative doesn't exist," he said. "None of it." She was quiet. "You asked me something once," he said. "What would make it right?" I said nothing makes it right. I remember. "I still think that's true," he said. "But I think this," he gestured at the table, at the diner, at the shared air between them, at everything beyond it that had grown from that first night. "This is what you do when nothing makes it right. You don't fix the wrong. You build something true on top of the place where the wrong happened." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. "You should have been in a TED Talk," she said. He almost laughed. "Really almost. I've got a better gig." She smiled. "A real one. Not the ghost version, not the suppressed version. A full, real, unguarded smile that changed her entire face and made her look for just a moment like someone who had forgotten to protect herself and found out it was okay." Daniel saw it and thought, "There she is. There's who she actually is." He didn't say it. Some things are better as recognition than as words. 2 months later, on a Saturday in May that came in warm and clear, the Lifeline Initiative held its first community event in the Millfield Community Center. It wasn't a gala, it wasn't a fundraiser. It was just a morning coffee and food and tables where people could come and talk, get information, connect with resources, tell their story to someone who would hear it without a clipboard and a 15-minute appointment window. 43 people came through the door. Marcus Webb drove down from Providence. He sat at a table and talked to 3 people who were in their first month after a layoff, the exact dark country he'd been through, and he talked to them the way people talk when they've been somewhere and come back and know the terrain. Patricia Okafor came from New Haven in her scrubs because she'd just finished a night shift and hadn't wanted to miss it. She helped Rosa at the intake desk, and she was good at it in the specific way that nurses are good at things efficient and warm simultaneously, which is harder than it sounds. Margaret Simmons worked the resource table. She knew every form, every program, every number to call at every county office. She answered questions with the precision of someone who had spent 20 years in HR and was now using them trace. Dax Ken Tran in the direction it should have always been pointed. Lily was there too. Daniel hadn't asked her. She'd asked him. She'd said, on Wednesday night over dinner, "Can I come Saturday? I want to help." And he'd said, "It might be boring." And she'd given him the look she gave him when she found him underestimating her, which was a look that had been in her face since approximately age 9 and had only gotten sharper. She ran the coffee table with the focused competence of a 14-year-old who takes everything seriously. She learned names. She remembered orders. She moved through the room with the specific confidence of someone who has inherited the best version of both her parents and knows, without arrogance, that she has something to offer. Sophia watched her from across the room. Daniel was watching Sophia watch Lily when Sophia caught him looking. She didn't look away. Neither did he. They held it for a moment. That look, in that room, with 43 people who had been to the bottom of something and were finding their way back. Then Lily appeared at Daniel's elbow with a cup of coffee for him and said, "Dad, the woman from the newspaper is here." The reporter. Daniel looked. The Courant reporter was indeed there, notebook open, talking to a man Daniel recognized from the intake file, a former logistics manager. 58 years old, laid off 8 months ago, first week in the Lifeline program. "Let her work," Daniel said. "Don't interrupt." Lily went back to the coffee table. Daniel turned and found Sophia beside him. "Good room," she said. "Good room," he agreed. They stood there together watching their work move through the space, watching Rosa laugh with a client, watching Margaret explain a county program to a couple in their 60s who were holding hands, watching Marcus lean forward over a table with someone young and scared and say something that made that person's shoulders drop out of their ears for the first time in however long. "Next month we take on twice as many clients," Sophia said. "Rosa thinks we need another coordinator by summer. I think she's right. We'll need another 10,000 to cover salary. I have a call Monday with a foundation out of New Haven. They fund early intervention workforce programs. The timing is good. Tell me who before you call." "Already planned to." She paused. "I always plan to now. It's not hard anymore. I think it was only hard at the beginning because I wasn't sure you'd still be there on the other side of the telling." He looked at her. "I'm still here." She looked at him. "I know." Lily's voice floated across the room from the coffee table, something about whether anyone wanted decaf, and Daniel glanced at her and felt the specific fullness that a parent feels when their child is doing something good in the world and doesn't need to be told to do it. He thought about a November night in a diner. A woman in a torn coat standing next to his table. 4 words whispered barely above the noise of ordinary life. He thought about the fork he'd slammed down. The hand that shook, the question that had cracked him open, what kind of man am I going to be right now? He'd answered it. Not perfectly. Not without friction and failure and the specific hard work of rebuilding trust with someone you had every reason not to trust. Not without waking up some nights, still carrying the weight of what had been taken. Not without the name Terry Simmons, folded behind his driver's license, still there, still carried, because some things you don't put down, you just learn to carry them towards something instead of away from everything. He'd answered it by staying in the room, by ordering the soup, by saying Thursday twice until she believed he meant it, by putting a badge on a conference table and letting it be what it actually was, not a monument to the worst thing but the foundation of the next thing. A person's worth, Daniel Carter had come to understand, is not measured by what they lose. It is not measured by what is taken from them or what they are forced to sell. or which box they carry out of which building on which day that rearranges everything. It is measured by what they do in the room when they have every reason to walk out and they choose instead to pull out the chair. He had pulled out the chair. And from that one small action, smaller than a decision, barely larger than a reflex, just a tired man on a Thursday night, choosing to be more than his own anger, something had grown that was real and solid and pointed toward the right things. In the Millfield Community Center on a Saturday morning in May, with 43 people finding their way back and a 14-year-old running the coffee table like she owned the room, Daniel Carter was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not past the pain, not beyond it, standing on top of it, building